The biggest pain of apartheid was robbing human beings of their dignity. To say to a human being that you are black or you're a woman, so you are not a full human being.
After decades of apartheid, millions of South Africans demanded change for the first time. The people would help write the Constitution. More than 2 million submissions were sent to the Constitutional Assembly. 20,000 citizens attended constitutional hearings. 490 representatives were tasked with writing the new constitution. But one question remained: what rights should every South African have?
Constitutional talk.
Amongst one of the most pressing issues which has to be decided about our Bill of Rights in South Africa is the inclusion of social and economic rights. In other words, should the right to housing, medical care, education have the same status as the right to vote, the right to speak freely, and the right to associate?
You've spoken about a multi-pronged approach, doing the research, attending political and community meetings, and going directly into communities to listen. This became the largest nationwide public participation program ever undertaken. From your experience, what was that process like on the ground?
It was incredibly moving to see the level of engagement that people had, the seriousness with which members of the theme committee also engaged with the community and reached out to them. There were a lot of written submissions and we read through all of that. So I think in terms of the actual rural hearings, many of the members of theme committees like Naledi, Pandor and so forth could probably give you a better sense. One of the big public hearings on socioeconomic rights was held in the chamber of the National Assembly in Parliament, and it was very, very well attended, and we heard voices from a diverse spectrum of people on should socioeconomic rights be included in the Constitution. If so, how should they be included? Should courts be given the power to enforce them, etc.? And I think that is indeed, one of the features of the 96 Constitution, which is different from the 93 Constitution, which was your classic negotiated text, and it was meant as a bridge and an interim.
If you think back to those submissions, or even to that major public hearing you attended, what would you say was some of the key contributions that came directly from ordinary members of the public?
The message really that I heard was people wanted these rights to be reflected. They wanted some of the experiences of the apartheid era, which was, not just civil and political rights being infringed, like the right to vote, their trial rights and so forth, but they also wanted many of their experiences with forced removals, with, services being so inferior, the health system being, really discriminatory, and they wanted those lived experiences to be reflected. And, a lot of men and women, stood up and spoke to that side of things.
We've spoken to people from different parties who said that while they were writing a constitution for everyone, they also carried their party's perspective from the ANC side. What was your mandate for what those rights should look like and how they should apply?
So ANC had already thought through a number of these issues. And I think having existed for a very long time, I always remind people, but by the time the ANC got into government, the ANC was over 80 years old as an organization. So it had a great deal of experience. it had, learnt from the international community and had a perspective that really spoke of the nation. And we were directed to be in the theme committees on behalf of South Africa. And this is why when our proposals or ideas would not hold all the time, we were ready to accept proposals as long as they did not challenge our notion that we were a nation that is to be united in its diversity. There were some parties, for example, I think the African Christian Democratic Party was really driven by the notion of Christianity. And often the debates were difficult because even in the ANC, we have Christians and other religions, but we were writing a constitution of civil and political rights in a modern era, moving toward the 21st century. So they were very, very anti clauses referring to sexual orientation. They were very robust on women's equality and particularly against reproductive rights for women. So we had to be ready to counter that without offending Christians within the ANC and ensuring that they understand why we would advance particular clauses. I think the one on the right to life was a particularly difficult debate, particularly in reference to women and reproductive rights. And there were even some women within the ANC that had a serious constraint around this. So certainly matters of the IFP largely, I think, were in the theme dealing with provincial rights, so provincial and local government, and that notion of exclusive rights and concurrent, because they wanted some stronger confederal system than we were prepared to have as the ANC. You then also on justice had elements of justice within the Bill of Rights. So things like prohibiting torture. We had ex-political prisoners in the theme committees, and they were very concerned about clauses that would deal with aspects that had impacted on their experience of being in prison, where you're denied rights, you're tortured, there's no privacy, so all of those things. No bail, you could be held, detained without trial for long periods. So sometimes I think, the anger that some people feel toward the Bill of Rights and the Constitution relates as well to our historic experience and the fact that you could not have a constitution that doesn't address the history and provide protections that indicate the kind of society you aspire to create.
I'd like to ask about the rights of detainees and prisoners, particularly because you personally experienced life as a political prisoner. How important was it to ensure that the Constitution strongly protects these rights so that people would not again face unjust imprisonment, poor prison conditions, or detention simply because of their political affiliation?
The right to protest, the right to have a political view is a fundamental right. And so little kids being detained and whatever because they were opposing oppression is just like heartbreaking. I think the right to be imprisoned in decent prison circumstances, not like what we have now, where people are just crushed into little cells and there's overcrowding, and it's inhuman. It's really inhuman. The right not to be tortured. I just think you're not doing your work as a police if you feel you've got to torture stuff out of people. And people being forced to make statements under torture is unbelievably unacceptable.
I'm curious about the use of the word inhuman rather than inhumane in Section 12 of the Constitution, which protects the right to freedom and security of the person. It states that no one may be treated or punished in a cruel, inhuman, or degrading way. That choice of wording is quite significant, isn't it?
Well, inhuman, yeah. Although I think it's very close to inhumane. I think they're almost similar things, but it's inhuman to injure another person purposefully. As an ex-detainee, I have a lot of concern about the rot that is there. It's like what I said. First time you're arrested and you get beaten up, that's a time that changes your whole relationship to power.
Would you say the same applies in the case of gender-based violence? That it too falls under treatment that is cruel, inhuman, or degrading?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a subtle difference between inhumane and inhuman. Inhumane describes actions that lack compassion, cruelty, harshness, or indifference to human suffering. It's when someone is treated without mercy or care. Inhuman, however, goes further. It refers to treatment so brutal, so degrading, that it denies a person's very humanity. It suggests a level of cruelty that goes beyond ordinary wrongdoing. So while inhumane means lacking compassion, inhuman describes something far more severe, a violation of human dignity itself.
Yeah. And we, unfortunately, have got a culture of violence now.
When you think back, many different groups must have felt strongly about having their voices heard. Is there any particular group, whether the landless or marginalized communities or others, whose input you remember having meaningful impact on the Constitution?
Our Constitution, and particularly from our side, is inspired by the lessons that came from the ordinary people. We went to the length and breadth of our country, talking to them about what we're trying to do and asking them, what do they want? Uppermost in our people was the restoration of their dignity. Freedom, yes, of course we wanted that. But this thing of being treated like a human being, you might think that it's something that you take for granted, whereas it was not. Everywhere we went, people were excited just to meet and see us and say, is it true that you are members of parliament? You. And some of them will tell you that, look, it's too late in my life now. Nothing is going to change for me, but make sure that my children don't experience what I went through. And what people wanted, very few things. Very, very few things. They want roof over their heads. They want their kids to go to school. And they want their kids to be fed. Look at our Bill of Rights today. It contains all those things that our people said they wanted. Education for our kids. We want houses. We want food. And we made sure that we guarantee those things.
This constitution was written by representatives elected by more than 20 million people. There are also some provisions in it that are quite unique or rare in constitutions. Are there any that you would particularly highlight?
I don't think we should underestimate the impact that the South African Constitution made on the liberation of women, not only in South Africa, but worldwide. The other big thing for me in the Constitution is the question of dignity. Because under colonialism and apartheid, oppressed people had material suffering, of course, because they were not allowed to stay where they wanted to. They were not allowed to do businesses. Jobs were reserved for white people. The main thing the Constitution does is to grant and protect the dignity of every human being in South Africa, regardless of racial orientation, regardless of age, even children have the right to have their dignity protected. Women have the right to have people from all religious groups have the right. People from any kind of sexual orientation. Dignity is the big thing that this constitution has given us in this country. Self-respect, giving people self-respect, that's a very big element for me in this constitution.